Dr. Jessica is a postdoctoral fellow at Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. She's a member of the International Dark Energy Survey Collaboration, where she co leads the analysis team that seeks to understand the mysterious dark energy. She is heavily involved in science outreach and making STEM fields more accessible and welcoming to everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. So, first of all, how did you decide to become an astrophysicist? Do you remember a specific moment that made you realize this?
Yeah, it was probably a gradual process. Like I'm sure you'll hear from a lot of people. I was always interested in astronomy as a kid, but then like maybe kind of forgot about it after I was about 10 until kind of close to university. And I really came to astrophysics through the route of getting really interested in physics. Um, so I think like end of high school, I read a couple books like, Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, among others, and found it really interesting. And then at my undergraduate university, which is Michigan State University, there was a program that I let me work in a laboratory or some kind of research project, sort of like as an assistant for like 6 or 8 hours a week. And I could pick the field, and I had just read those books, so I picked physics. But because like I didn't really know what physics was as a field, and I didn't really have a concept of like what being a researcher was, like that you could actually get a job doing that. It took me like a couple years to like really understand like what graduate students were. Like I didn't know what a PhD was when I started undergrad. And yeah, like as an undergraduate, I worked in like a condensed matter or like nanotechnology lab for a couple years. I worked in a research group on one of the particle physics experiment at the Large Hadron Collider, so the big particle experiments. And then finally, at the end, towards my like end of undergrad, I started working on a cosmology project, which cosmology is kind of the field between physics and astrophysics. And that kind of piqued my interest. And there's a little bit more ping-ponging before I actually kind of got to the field I work in, between like a master's degree and a PhD. But yeah, gradual process of finding things that seemed really interesting to me, learning about them, and then actually learning that like, oh, these things I'm reading about in books, it's they're not, that knowledge just isn't in existence. It's stuff that people have like figured out. And there was at a certain point I had a realization of like, oh, I could be one of those people. And I found that really exciting.
That's a very interesting journey in a way from reading about it to actually working in the field. That's
Mhm.
amazing. So,
Yeah, I definitely feel lucky.
you spent 2 years at the University of Cambridge as a Marshall Scholar. So, what was that experience like for you, and how do you think it further influenced your career path?
Yeah, I'm that's an experience that I'm very grateful for. So for people who aren't familiar, the Marshall Scholarship is a program that I think it's up to 50, but somewhere between 30 and 50 American students go and study in the UK and receive funding to study in the UK for usually 2 years each. And yeah, I did, it was like 2 years of master's program at Cambridge. 1 year was this like lecture-based or like coursework-based master's program called the Part 3 Maths, which is just, kind of like drinking a fire hose. Like, it's a lot of content at once of learning a lot of different theoretical physics. Which was good in the sense that like compared to a lot of the other students who were there, I probably had a bit less math background. Like I didn't really have the like I had never taken general relativity before that, and I think most of the other people there, they expected you had taken that. And so it was like kind of a sampling of a lot of different topics. It was rough in some ways in that I had come from at least a system of university and education that I was familiar with had a lot of continuous assessment. Like you'd turn in homework, it would get checked, you'd have exams the quarter. And the way that program works is you take all of these courses, and then mainly the only evaluation is a big set of exams in June at the end. So there's not it's very difficult to check in about how am I actually doing? Am I on top of things? And I definitely dealt a lot with like imposter syndrome, if you're familiar with that, like because you're comparing how like confident you feel to how confident other people sound. And there's always going to be a mismatch because people put their best face forward. And I think there I got kind of really learned the importance of like finding a study group with people who like communicated in a way that's compatible with like how I learn and how I think about things, and trying not to let too much ego interfere with that. And then the second year there, I stuck around and did research. So I worked on a research project in technically it was in the math department, but it was on studying how we can test general relativity in certain like astrophysics systems. So like what kinds of modifications could you make to your theory of gravity that wouldn't already be ruled out? And looking at one particular case of like how that might show up around black holes was kind of a deep dive into like doing a research project that was like my project. And then yeah, like lifestyle, that was like the first time I had lived outside of the US, which is where I'm from. Their US to UK is probably one of the easier international moves because there's not a language barrier. But still, I think spending some time in a different place was valuable for like I felt like I grew a lot in terms of like you realize some things that you think of, this is just how things are. You realize like this is how things are here where I grew up, and it's not necessarily the norm everywhere else. And so beyond like the physics journey, just like getting to meet people from all over the world and getting to know a new place. And I'm still close friends with a lot of people I met there now. I'm actually heading to Ireland in a couple of weeks for somebody's wedding of who I met while I was there. So it's been definitely a lifelong impact and some nice networks of people. And
Important experience that you had in a way. I think it changed you in a lot of different ways. And I feel that that's very important. What does a typical workday look like for you?
yeah, it can be pretty variable. Right now in the summer, when there's a little bit less structure in the weekly schedule at Perimeter Institute, at least. So usually during the academic year, so like fall through spring, we have a number of different like seminars per week. So I might go to a cosmology seminar, a particle physics seminar. So that a seminar being like somebody's visiting and they're giving a presentation on their research. But yeah, as a postdoc, I have a pretty free form schedule. So I don't have teaching responsibilities. Like my job basically is just to do research. So I usually, try to get in between 9 and 10, though my arrival time varies a little bit. I'm in a couple different scientific collaborations that involve people all over the world, and there's usually a few like telecons per week that if they're relevant to me, I'll call on. So it's a Zoom call. So yeah, these galaxy survey like scientific collaborations, we've been spending a lot of time on Zoom even before the COVID-19 pandemic. At Perimeter, there's a nice we call it the Black Hole Bistro, or that's what it's called. There's a little cafeteria restaurant on the ground floor, and people tend to eat lunch together, so we'll eat lunch there. I'm involved in a couple of research projects, or mostly one, but where I'm mentoring a graduate student with a faculty member on a research project. So if we have a meeting, we'll get together and talk through like progress. And in terms of when I'm, don't have like something scheduled, my work is a mix of, I do a lot of coding. So I do work mostly in Python to like analyze data and run calculations. Doing physics or astronomy research involves a lot more writing than I think I might have pictured as an undergrad. So working on writing up results in a paper, making slides to share results with collaborators. And then, yeah, a reality of the postdoc experience is because, so postdoctoral positions, they're research jobs that usually last, depending on where you're at, 3 years. There's some longer ones, but it's a finite job. And so I'm about to start my third year of my postdoc, and I've got 2 more years left at Perimeter. But sorry, this is a long way to say up. So you're kind of always applying for jobs. So since I'm in my second postdoctoral position, the jobs I'm looking at are mostly sort of at the faculty level or something that would be a more permanent. And that'll pick up more in the fall, but there's a lot of like statement writing and trying to frame like, all right, what are the themes of what I'm interested in doing? What do I want to do in the next several years? And yeah, trying to find a balance between all of these things of a thing I have recognized about myself is that if I've got any other tasks I can do, um I'll usually put writing off. And so like I'm trying to get a little better about not doing that at the last minute. So that's the sort of usual mix of things. And then occasionally if there's like an outreach event or if I'm going to be giving a talk, I might be working on putting that together. Yeah, it's pretty variable. There's not a lot of structure in my schedule, which can be really nice and can be a little bit tough sometimes just for like prioritizing tasks.
It still sounds very exciting in a way. You have so many different things you can work on and fit into your day. Uh,
Mhm.
Very random question, but what are your favorite science books, movies, or any show?
So I got really into watching The Expanse, or like the book series and the TV show a little while ago. I really like the movie Arrival. I don't know if that's quite, I don't know, I guess it's science fiction. In terms of books like about science, it's been a while since I've read it, but there's a biography of Paul Dirac, who's one of the people who like figured out quantum mechanics and particularly the extension of quantum mechanics that sort of leads to particle theories and postulates the existence of antimatter. But this biography is called The Strangest Man, which is sort of, it's like a very nice mix of like portrait of this person along with like the history of quantum mechanics and how all of that sort of intersected with, you know, what was going on in Europe and the world around that time. So it was like a very nicely written sort of history of science book that stands out to me.
It sounds like an amazing book. Um, did you have a role model growing up? And if yes, then who was it?
Um, I don't know that I had a particular role model. Like, I definitely had some inspiration, you know, from, as I mentioned, reading Brief History of Time and various other sort of pop science, physics books. But yeah, there was never particularly somebody that I was like, oh, I want to do what they do. Once I got to university, I definitely had a number of very good mentors, like professors that I either worked with or took classes with that I, you know, really appreciated the guidance of and sort of saying like, oh, this is an example of how one's life could be if you could, you know, continue doing this as a career. Um, And so like, I guess, yeah, maybe the shout out that the basically I mentioned I worked in like 3 different research groups as an undergraduate, and like the professors I worked for in all of those groups were all definitely part of shaping my experience in physics. And then I guess a little bit of an unusual bump in my career trajectory is that so right after I graduated from undergrad, so this is less, I guess, role model and more like people I appreciate. Right after I finished undergrad, I was actually diagnosed with lymphoma, so like a type of cancer. And so I ended up having, like, I went to the UK a year later than I was supposed to because, you know, I was getting treated for that. And the professor, one of the professors I had worked for, was working for, and others in my undergrad department were really great about like pulling strings and figuring out how to basically let me stay and sort of be like effectively enrolled as a first year PhD student so I could take like physics courses and keep busy while I was getting chemotherapy, which was, I think, great for my learning of physics, and I think also great for my like mental health that year of like being able to have a bit of a routine and be in an environment that, you know, wasn't just moving back home with my parents and feeling depressed about everything getting delayed by a year. So, you know, my parents are lovely. Just, you know, it wasn't what I was looking for at that time. Yeah, so I guess maybe to frame that a little bit in terms of role model, it's less like, oh, I want to be like this person, but sort of just having this idea of like keeping an eye out for like, you know, like I deeply appreciated those mentors sort of generally introducing me to the field of physics and also, you know, probably helping keep me in the field by, providing that support that year. And I don't know. I would like to hopefully be able to be as supportive to students someday.
I hope you're doing much better now. And it's so amazing that you balanced both your dream and your health at the same time. That's really amazing. What do you think makes a scientist a good scientist, considering there's a very low probability, I believe, of success in this field? So, what do you think makes a great scientist?
Ooh, that's a good question, because I think there's a mix of like asking interesting questions, or like there's a art which I probably have not perfected, but I'm working on, of like finding the right intersection of like, what are your skills, like what are you able to do particularly well, what questions do you find interesting, and what questions do other people find interesting. I think there's also an element, especially in like cosmology and these large collaborations. A thing I really appreciate in scientists is like being good communicators and good collaborators. So, if you're trying to work as a group on something, there's a lot of external pressures. There's a lot of people in these sort of short-term jobs who are worried about, can I stay in the field more long-term or not? And so there's maybe a temptation to try and like grab the more interesting tasks and do them. But like, it's always going to be a big project, and there's always more work than one or a couple people can do. And if people aren't talking to each other about what they're working on, you might double up effort, or have somebody work on something and then realize it's not actually needed because somebody else did. So like trying to like allocate effort and check in. And then also, if you're communicating, if you get stuck on something, you can get your colleagues' insights, because no one can know everything. And so I think scientists that I really admire, there's elements of being curious, of asking interesting questions. And then I think for people that I want to work with or admire, there's this element of, I think, a certain amount of like communication and empathy with people around them, and being able to like effectively leverage teams of people and interface with that to get the most done. Because the individual people may have interesting ideas, or be able to build off of interesting ideas from conversations they have with colleagues, but in terms of like being able to make measurements and analyze that, and like ask the universe what physics is actually behind what it's doing, that's inherently a collaborative effort. So I don't know, I think I'm hesitant to use the word great, which I'm not really sure why, but I think there are people that are definitely inherently good at things and are excellent. But there's also a lot of luck in terms of who you're matched up with for mentoring, and if you can meet collaborators that you work well with, and there's a lot of synergy between people that go into doing great science.
An amazing answer. And I feel a lot of people think that a great scientist only one who is a genius somehow, but there are a lot of other qualities a person must have to become a good scientist. What advice would you give to the younger version of you?
No, I think there's probably some element of try not to worry so much. I think at every stage in my life, I've always felt like, oh, in the past I was more focused and enthusiastic and organized, and now I'm kind of all over the place. And wondering like I think I have the technical skills to do things, but am I good enough at time management? Am I good enough at focusing when I have a wide open schedule and just tasks to do? And like, or like, am I working hard enough? And in my mind, I'm like, if I'm not like doing too much introspection, I'm always sure that like, oh, in the past I was so much more focused and hardworking than I am now. But then if I like go back and look at like old journals, I'm like, I was worrying about the same thing at basically every every stage. And so I think having a mindset of just kind of trying to balance the doing the things you need to do to try and keep being able to do science for a job if that's what you want to do, while also trying to like stay aware of what aspects of it got you excited about it or make you feel excited and curious. And I think for me, like a thing that I've like relearned multiple times through my career is that, you know, doing something involving like teaching or outreach is really important to me for that. And that if I'm like buried in research and like trying to prepare job applications, it can be very easy to forget that like the stuff that's stressing me out is you know, the code that I'm annoyed that won't work is code to like work towards learning about what the universe is made of. And, you know, even if I don't end up staying in like physics long term, which, you know, knock on wood, hopefully I will, but you know, there's a lot of other interesting things to do. But like, you know, looking back, like what at each stage, what will I be glad that I do if this is the main part of my experience in astrophysics? And so things like, you know, taking some time to like do some outreach or chat with interested people like you, I don't know, taking a step back and feeling lucky that, you know, this is something that I get to do is a thing that I find really useful to revisit. Also, concrete advice is, you know, I kind of touched on this when I was talking about the master's program, is like, you're not in it alone, and finding people in your cohort or fellow students, like having a good study group. You don't have to like mesh well with everyone, and if like trying to study with somebody freaks you out because they keep talking about things that you're trying to figure out like it's obvious, you know, people project in different ways, so like finding people that you work well with and like who are going through similar things than you can really, that's I think very important. And then, you know, as you get to later stages in your career, that becomes a really nice network because, you know, as a smart and interested and curious person, people that you interface well with are going to be smart and curious and interesting people that will, I'm sure, go do many interesting things.
That was incredible advice. And well, I'm make sure to keep this in mind because it's so many important points that I think you forget while you're going through something. And it's something that you should always have at the back of your mind, like looking at the bigger picture, understanding why you're doing what you're doing. So finally, what do you think is the best part of being an astrophysicist?
Yeah, best part. I think just the fact that, you know, the big questions that drive all of my sort of day-to-day to-do items are really like the big questions. So, you know, a lot of the stuff that I do in terms of coding or writing up results and things, you know, they might look similar if I were doing something in sort of a more in an industry setting with like a data science or research career, which I think there can be a lot of interesting manifestations of that. But at least for now, you know, if I take a step back and be like, all right, I'm doing this coding and trying to debug this and get something working. Yeah, as I already said, like in search of like understanding how things work at the most fundamental level. And I think it's that's pretty special, and getting to get to know people who are, you know, working on that in their own, in different ways and from different angles. Just, yeah, being able to have a job that like the premise is this sort of fundamental curiosity. I feel very grateful for that.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Jessica. I learned a lot from you and I had a lot of fun talking to you today. And I hope my audience also learned a lot from you.